movies. They have always existed. The most recent example of a really popular long movie was Snack Science's Justice League. But sometimes there are movies that are over 3 hours long and they're the most boring and most unentertaining movies in the entirety of movies. Sometimes you sort of just cut out things of a movie and made them shorter. I know some movie makers just want to make movies a certain time to appease certain people, but sometimes it is not always the best thing to do to make a movie have a long run time. And yes, younger people, some people of shorter attention times will not even want to watch a long movie unless it has, unless Endgame probably be the only exception. But there are lots of people who will not sit down for a 3 hour movie, especially if it's in the theaters. So, several examples of movies that are really long that have released very recently is Next Day Justice League, Endgame, Spider-Man No Way Home, Dune, and of course the Batman. The Batman is not 3 hours long, but it's almost 3 hours long. The Most of the people who criticize the Batman criticize the movie for being nearly 3 hours long. The movie is 2 hours and 56 minutes long. I have not seen the Batman yet, so I'm not gonna tell you if it's a good or a bad movie. But the Batman is pretty long. And for people who don't really have the attention spans for these types of movies, it's gonna be pretty tough for them. But there are some movies that you don't really need. Well, if the content is pretty good, we don't really need to worry about that. For example, Snacks is Justice Week. Okay, this came out in 2021, and it's basically what the movie sort of meant, because the movie is split into two movies, and basically if you get the Blu-ray version, you can just watch the movie, one half of the movie, and watch the other half later. But the movie is a 4 hour long movie. It is that long, and but the thing of Justice League is that you never get bored watching this. Compare this to a movie like The Postman. Okay, The Postman is a very boring and very long movie that I think everybody agrees that this movie is not a good movie at all. It has an 8% Rotten Tomatoes and it has a 6.1 on IMDb. And it's just a very boring movie. It's the same length and running time as the Batman and Endgame. Because, of course, Endgame has 10 minutes of credits, so basically the same length as Endgame and the Batman. Difference between, this and Zack Snyder's Justice League and the Batman is that I haven't seen the Batman, but the difference between that, and Zack Snyder's Justice League and Endgame and the other movies we'll talk about later is the fact that those movies are filled with content. If you fill it with just boring, the main character that's running around on a horse for 30 minutes, people are gonna get bored of that. Okay? As well. People want plot movement. People want progression in the movie. This is a movie that doesn't really have a good progression. There's a whole 40 minutes of him. Near the end of the movie, there's a whole 40 minutes of him going kissing the main girl in the movie because they fall in love. Like, does anyone give a crap about that? No. Okay? Maybe people who love romance movies, but this is supposed to be a sci-fi movie. But then it turns right away into a romance movie. And I could talk about why, action movies have unnecessary romances many, many, many times. Do we really need the two main characters kissing? It's an action movie. Okay, but you have to put some romance for the woman in there, obviously. Which that makes sense because you don't want the woman to be like, oh, but why can't they be together? Well, people want these two characters to be together, and the filmmaker saying, okay, these two can be together. Have them kiss at the end, at the big finale, and it's kind of like a trope at this point. But The Postman is just a movie like that. If we compare The Postman to a movie like War of the Rings, all of them. Okay, War of the Rings is a movie just like the Justice League movies, and stuff like that. The movies are like 9 hours long if you watch all three of them, but all three movies are so filled with content and so filled with progression that you won't really notice the runtime. All three movies are basically nearly 3 hours long, and made a ton of money at the box office. But unlike other movies, these movies have a really good progression as well. If you get the DVD version, you can watch. If you get the extended version, you can basically just watch half one day and watch the other half the other day. It isn't like, movies like now, oh, we're just making it long for the sake of getting awards. And those are the worst type of movies. Okay. Basically, the worst type of movies are basically movies that are basically wrong. So basically, and then they have to include filler to basically justify the runtime of the movie. And one movie is like Wonder Woman 1984. Okay, the movie is nearly like 3 hours. It's the same length as Spider-Man: No Way Home. Guess what? I think the main reason why this movie flopped was because it was this long. And unlike Spider-Man: No Way Home, which is brimmed filled with story and content, Wonder Woman 1984 has a lot of filler scenes, and it is too long for a movie like this. They sort of at least cut like 10 to 15 minutes of this movie out, and maybe people would have actually liked this movie. But we will have never known. This movie is 2 hours and 41 minutes long. And then, of course, if this movie isn't that long, people are like, well, we need the cut of this movie, even though most of the things that were added to this movie is filler. But then, of course, you have movies that they have to add to it, like Batman vs. Superman. I have not seen the full version of Batman vs. Superman, but there are movies where they just basically add things to it to make it better overall and later of the time. Another movie that justifies its runtime is Interstellar. Unlike most space state movies, Interstellar is actually a pretty good movie. I have seen the movie and it's nearly 3 hours long. But Interstellar is one of those movies where you don't get bored watching it because it has a decent story progression and it has this decent plot progression, which means, and the IMDb score that agrees with me on this one. This movie has a very good plot progression and story progression and characters that you don't really get bored watching Interstellar compared to The Postman or some other 3 hour movies, okay? As well. And there are some other examples like The Godfather as well. The first one. The second one has a bit boring scenes as well. But a lot of long movies, a lot of the more classic ones like The Godfather, also as well justify the runtime. But a lot of Christopher Nolan's movies as well do this as well. So Interstellar, Inception, and of course The Dark Knight are all pretty long movies, but they justify the length by, of course, being full of content and full story progression and literally not much filler in the movies whatsoever. And the problem with some many movies that try to capture that long time is the fact that they try to just stuff it full of filler, and the plot isn't really progressing, and then you get bored and want to watch something else. So long movies done right are movies like Zack Snyder's Justice League, Avengers Endgame, Christopher Nolan movies, The Godfather, and Dances Over is another long movie done right. But there's sometimes it does horribly. Like Wonder Woman 1984 is one of those movies where they could have cut like 15 minutes of it. Even a movie that like True Eyes is 2 hours 24 minutes. Okay, it could have easily just been a simple 2 hour movie as well. Well, but there's lots of movies that does employ, filler as well, and we don't really see many, and we also have bad long movies as well. Okay, bad and worst long movies with long run times as well. And yeah, there's a lot of movies that really just waste your time and not worth watching. And here's some other movies examples as well. Well, but that's by the critics, so yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of movies where the runtime is not really justified and it's not really a good thing either. So that's basically about this video. Goodbye.